The following program contains discussion of real-life law enforcement situations and may include graphic content and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to End of Watch with Bootsy and Sal. We're your hosts, Kevin Grogan and Lou Velosi.
We'll weigh in on topics that affect the law enforcement community and invite guests who have their fingers on the pulse of our nation.
With over 40 years of combined law enforcement experience, ranging from patrol to multi-million-dollar federal investigations, we are not going to pull any punches.
Welcome to End of Watch with Bootsy and Sal. I'm your host, Kevin Grogan, a.k.a. Bootsy.
And I'm Lou Velosi, a.k.a. Sal.
I just want to point out to your viewers that Sal made me change seats, so I'm a little uncomfortable today.
Yeah, I'm throwing Bootsy off. I switched it up.
I'm on the wrong side, and I don't adapt to change very well.
Go ahead, Bootsy.
Oh, I got nothing to say after you moved me over.
All right, listen, our last guest was Captain Dale Dye, U.S. Marine Corps, Vietnam vet, Hollywood legend for the last 4 decades, Band of Brothers, Platoon, Saving Private Ryan, and to open that podcast up, Bootsy went on his soapbox. And so I'm going to take my turn this time, and it's not really a soapbox. I just have 2 personal stories before we bring in these 2 warriors that we have as our guests today. But my stories happen to be about one of these warriors, Dino Ortiz. So as Bootsy can attest to, and Dino, my career ended kind of like that NASCAR driver's race ended in Daytona last week in a similar fashion. And you find out when you get jammed up as a Fed, you know, that your herd thins really quick. And the phone, you know, those phones stop ringing really quick. Immediately. And, you know, you got the stank on you, so to say. And you find out real quick which one of your brothers and sisters, you know, are going to stand by you and who's not. And I got to say, Dino Ortiz, who I actually worked with for over a decade in the same office, but at this time he had risen to being an assistant special agent in charge in ASAC. And a lot of times, ATF is not known for its upper management making sound decisions and being stand-up people sometimes. It's just the way it is. Somewhere they lose at it in the process. I don't know if it's a frontal lobotomy or what it is.
I think that's law enforcement in general.
Yeah, but ATF especially. But I just want to say one thing. Dino Ortiz, to say that he stood by me would be an understatement. And that is a solid dude. And Dino, I can never thank you enough for being one of the few that stood by me. Dino Ortiz never lost his honor when he went up into ATF supervision, never lost his character, and most importantly, never lost his loyalty. And I want to thank you, brother. To our whole audience, I want to thank you.
Lou, yeah, here's the thing, brother. And this is where, in law enforcement in general, first of all, thank you for your kind words, bro. They're way over the top. But here's the thing that in general, law enforcement management misses, in my opinion. And that is, you got to remember where you started. Whether you're a beat cop, whether you're meter maid, whatever it is, special agent. I'm still trying to figure out what the special part is all about. You're just an agent. And if you forget that you were that before you move on up and you toss aside everybody that in some shape, form, or fashion helped you rise to that position, because I didn't do it by myself. Yeah, I was the one that interviewed and I was the one that got selected. But did I not learn from you and you learn from me? Or from the crew we had, the Randy Beaches, the Michelle Kaufmans, the Ralph Bignazis, the Lance Hearns? Those are the people that you interact with. And not only that, I remember talking about SPD, the old trap. You know, you had Gary Glenboski, you had Max Dello, you had Cortez, you had Dauphin, you had all those guys.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah, we lost you for a second, brother. But hey, so before I bring in Victor, Dino, we lost you for a second, but I have a wedding story involving Dino. And Victor, you'll see that we get serious on this podcast, but we also...
It better not be the one involving Rick Register.
No. It's my wedding. Bootsy, should I hit it now? It's a quick one, or should I save it to the end?
I'm scared to even know what the hell where you're going.
Victor's going to enjoy this, I think, though. So, Victor, I'm going to tell it to you, man. My wife is a beautiful Ecuadorian woman, right? She comes from a family that have huge asses, okay? Big butted people. And so at my wedding, which Dino was at, her brother got up to make a speech, and no one escapes the ass in her family, men and women. And so her brother had to get up from the aisle and go up to the podium, so everyone, it was on display, right? So after the wedding, and when I say after the wedding, I mean immediately after the wedding, while we're standing there.
Before the reception?
Before the reception, whoa. Dino felt the need to comment about it to my wife. I believe his words were, "Hey, Clara, your brother's got the biggest ass I've ever seen in my life." And I mean right after the wedding. And as Bootsy can attest to, my wife, she can turn on a dime, boy. And
quickly.
Yeah. I believe F.U. Dino was how it started. And I was like...
Oh, so she wasn't very upset.
And I was thinking in my brain, I was like, first of all, he's on point with his comment, but his timing is questionable at best.
My timing has never been good.
No, it hasn't. All right. I just wanted to get that story out of the way. And now I want to bring in another warrior and give him a little introduction here. Okay. Victor Avila, retired ICE special agent who had a long distinguished career, has become well known because of an incident that he was involved in Mexico that we are going to let him go into. But what I want to point out is first of all, this guy had a very distinguished career. And that comes from a former director of ICE about what this guy did before this event happened, this warrior in his career. And I just want to point out two things. Well, one thing really quick about both of these individuals. Not only was Victor Avila and Dino Ortiz on the front lines in this war on crime, that we all fought. They were on the front lines here in America doing that. But both of these guys volunteered at some point in their career to go fight this war in Mexico.
Which is way beyond the front line.
And let me just say one thing about that really quick. Bootsy's a combat vet. He was in Iraq. He fought for our country. It is a fact, a statistical fact, that Mexico is more dangerous than Iraq. The country of Mexico is a more dangerous place than Iraq. So for both of these warriors to volunteer, to go to Mexico to continue this fight I just want to give you guys both props. I want to thank you both for your amazing careers and for going above and beyond and volunteering for that. That being said, I want to bring Victor in, and I want to start out, Victor, by having you tell us where you grew up, how you grew up, and why the hell did you decide to become a law enforcement officer?
Well, thank you so much for the kind words. I really appreciate it, and thank you for having me on today. Yeah, I'm born and raised in El Paso, Texas. I'm a border rat, as people reference it. El Paso is a very unique town, as most border towns are. First generation Mexican American. My parents came over here legally, worked hard. My twin sister and I are the first ones to go to college in our family. I have an older sister that is also successful, and we worked hard all our lives. And I always kind of had an interest in law enforcement. I was a police explorer when I was a teenager in El Paso with El Paso Police Department. And that kind of gave me a great insight into really looking at policemen, policewomen in a very different light. I grew up respecting authority and respecting police, and a little bit of fear of that, was in there. You knew that when there was a presence of an officer in front of you, you acted a little different way and showed that respect. And so when I interacted with them and did a lot of community service as a police explorer, I found out that they're human beings just like us. They're people. They have families. They have the same issues that we have. And I earned a different respect for them because they go in these beats and these patrols and go from 0 to 10 in a split second and really earned the respect of the police and what they do, not just the community aspect, but what really surrounds law enforcement. And so that continued on. I went to college. I got a criminal justice degree from UTEP. And then I started at the county level. I had a lot of jobs, by the way. I used to work in construction. I was a postman for a while. I've been working since the age of 16 up until my retirement. But the first one, the opportunity opened was to be a state parole officer for the state of Texas, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. That was the opening. That was what presented itself. And it really, really started shaping my career because I dealt with the criminal elements. I was 23 years old and I was dealing with the worst of the worst, murderers, gang members. I was a gang intelligence officer dealing with sex offenders and really interacting and getting to know that world and earning the respect of these, veteran criminal guys, hardcore guys, taking instruction from this 23-year-old kid on where you can go and not go. And so I was able to manage that way. But then I've always been an ambitious kind of guy in a healthy way. And I realized that the state parole officer there was kind of an equivalent job in the federal level called the United States Probation Officer. That
pays a little better.
Yeah, a little better, twice as much as what I earned in the state. And so it didn't take long for me to do that, and I did. And my career started me off from El Paso, took me to San Antonio, became a federal probation officer, and then that exposed me to the whole U.S. court system. And I'll talk about how all that experience kind of came together as an agent, and honestly through the trial, because I knew about the sentencing guidelines. I used to prepare them for the district court, and I knew that the whole second side of the justice system. As law enforcement officers, a lot of people think you slap the cuffs on someone and that's the end. That's actually just the beginning of the rest of our judicial system. So once I became a federal probation officer, I was interviewing agents, ATF agents, FBI, DEA, Secret Service, all of them, INS back then, U.S. Customs special agents, and to conduct these pre-sentence investigation reports for the court. And then at one point I realized I didn't want to read about it and I didn't want to interview them. I really wanted to do what they were doing. And so back then I applied for the U.S. Customs Service when the Department of Homeland Security was just being created. So I'm one of those first ones to go through an ICE Academy that was created, but there was still no ICE badge. So when I graduated, my picture is kind of funny because I'm shaking the director's hand and I'm holding a certificate that says Immigration and Customs Enforcement Academy, but the badge that I'm holding up is the U.S. Department of Treasury, U.S. Customs Special Agent. And so I went through the growing pains of the new merger between the U.S. Customs Service and INS investigators, and I loved it. I loved doing that job, and really it took me back to El Paso. I was very fortunate to go back to El Paso, and really it was a great advantage because I know El Paso like the back of my hand. I grew up there, also going across the border, and very familiar with that, and that was so advantageous to me in these narcotics investigations and the interrogations that we did, because I knew the metro area. I knew these guys. I knew if they were lying, where they were coming from or not, because most of the time I had already been there myself. And so I had a great advantage. Also knowing the guidelines, knowing the court system, I knew what questions to ask sometimes during the interrogation to get them in there in certain categories during their confessions. So it was a great time, great time, and really was a great move in my career, and really enjoyed it.
Now, it must have been an interesting time when, Homeland Security is forming and all those, the agencies are blending. So really, with the experience you had at that point, you're on the bottom floor and able to kind of mold how that agency is going to operate.
Yeah. So you've been dealing with these cartel guys basically for your entire career.
Oh yeah.
One capacity or another.
If it wasn't the gangs, and now even more so, these gangs have always been kind of like the enforcers and working for the cartels in one way or another. Now they're really working with them directly. And I'm not talking about the gangs just at the border. I'm talking about the gangs in Chicago, in St. Louis, in Maryland, in Dallas, in Houston. These guys are connected to these cartels. That's how big the influence in the cartels are in our country. People think that they're not here. they're being naive and gravely mistaken. These cartels are embedded in our communities.
No, and that's one thing, that I think the country has shown over the last 3 to 4 years, with the President Trump being elected and stuff. The border became such a huge issue with, do we build the wall? Do we not build the wall? The one thing, and I don't know where you stand on all that, but I tell you flat out, the way I look at what I saw happen was, I saw clearly that the American people do not understand what a threat these cartels are to our nation. They just clearly do not understand. Like you said, okay, El Paso, yeah, it's a border town. Of course, you're going to have Mexican gangs, but Des Moines, Iowa, Chicago, Hartford, Connecticut, they're all affected. I mean, it's to call it a cancer is putting it mildly.
You're absolutely right, and yes, I've been exposed to these cartels in one form or the other from the very beginning. And yes, I do believe in the wall. I do believe in border security. I do believe in as much giving our men and women of CBP and ICE all the tools that they need. That border is so porous and so open that we need, and I know we're starting to seal it and we need to. The barriers is not going to solve everything, but it's really helpful. I work cases on the river where SUVs were driven across full of drugs. People, backpackers, 16 backpackers with 100 pounds of weed, each of them. That's 1,600 pounds of weed. Human smugglers bringing groups through the river. Man, a barrier would have been awesome to have there at that time.
Sure.
I've seen Mexican military cross in and out of the U.S. through that river, controlling that whole area. It's just the barrier is a great thing that we need. And so, yeah, I support border security all the way.
Hey, Victor, let me point out a fun fact to you, right? Because I like fun facts.
You're a fun guy.
So there's a common thread here with the four of us. Before we really got into the meat of our career with what we did, we all started, Bootsy started out as a cop in Connecticut, just a smaller town on the streets. I started out as an INS agent, but my beginnings were in the LA County Jail, because that's where we were assigned. So interviewing aliens to determine, alienage and portability. Dino Ortiz, and Victor, you start out in the, state parole and all that. Dino Ortiz, fun fact, started his illustrious career as a federal corrections officer.
Oh,
how about it, Dino?
Well, my federal career honestly started when I got commissioned in the Army. So I was in the Army first.
Cool.
Got out of the Army.
Braggart.
Got out of the Army, and in 1985, I don't know what the word, I was trying to get in as a contractor for the School of the Americas that was moving to Fort Benning. I couldn't get a job there. They said I was overqualified. I said, I'll do secretarial work. Anyway, I couldn't get a federal job. So I tried my hand at private, corporate thing. That didn't work well for me.
Yeah, you're not cut out for that.
I'm not. So I got to get back in the federal system. The only thing that was hiring at that time was BOP. So I got interviewed and I started working at USP Atlanta. And about a year and a half later, went through the Cuban riot, got held hostage for about 24 hours, got pulled over the wall by the FBI SWAT team, and then got hired by ATF.
Amazing. Hey, Dino, how, seriously, on a serious note, did you find that experience, just, being in the prison, being with the inmates, helped you, when you transitioned in your career with ATF, working undercover, working on the streets, did that help you, already had seen how, they conduct themselves, how they carry themselves, the interaction and all that?
It did, because, and especially Atlanta was unique. Atlanta, you had the majority of Atlanta was actually going to be closed down before the Mariolito boatload came over. And they didn't know where to put these people. And they said, well, we got a federal penitentiary that we're about to, close down. Let's put them there. So in order to make the prison run at the beginning and then throughout the years, you had a small contingent. When I say small contingent, you had about 200 to 300 American inmates. And then you had about 2,000 to 3,000 Cuban refugees or detainees. So working those two inmate population, it's totally different. The Cuban would come up, for example, and the statute of limitation is passed on this, obviously. I used to smoke at the time. So when I first started working a cell block is 5 tiers tall, 20 cells per tier, 8 men per cell. And only 3 of us worked it. So me being the rookie, I had the top 2 tiers. So if I get stabbed, by the time they get out to me, I'm bled out.
Yep.
So I would smoke. And the Cubans would go, hey man, give me a cigarette. I'm like, no, it's against the rules. And then I figured out, wait a minute. So I smoked Salem Lights at that time. But that was too expensive to get to the Cubans. So I would buy a carton of generic menthol cigarettes. And I'd have a pack of Salems for me, pack of generics. And when I had a problem cell, I would just put a cigarette there. They would take that cigarette, roll it up into 8 little joints of normal tobacco, and 8 guys would smoke. And I would control that cell. So that's how you worked the Cubans.
You got to give a little to get a little.
Now, if I was working the American side, that was totally different. Those guys were looking to get you pinched. They would come up and say, hey, man, my son, oh, my God, I've got this birthday card. I don't have money to get a stamp. Can you just give me a 10-cent stamp? Once you bought that 10-cent stamp, bro, that inmate owned you.
Yeah.
Because now he's going to snitch you out. So when you say, what did it bring to my career? Just sniff people out, read people, see if they're trying to do you, or can I do them? There was an incident in I'm 5'6", dude. I'm not big by any means.
Yeah, but you're a ball of fire, brother. You're a ball of fire.
Well, there was this Cuban. He was about 6'2", and he was pressed. He was big. So, and this is where I didn't know I was doing it, but I was doing some undercover. So the guy was giving me problems. I told him to take something down. He said, no. I said, dude, I just don't want the warden to take it away from you, whatever. Next thing it blows up to, he's like, I'm going to screw you up. Okay. Now this guy's 6'2". I'm 5'6". And I'm looking at this guy. I'm like, well, I got to make a play on him. I go, listen, I'll tell you what. I'm going to take everything off. I'm going to go call a guard. We're going to lock each other up. He's going to lock us in the shower. You beat the shit out of me, I fell down the stairs. But if I do the same to you, you can't snitch me out. He goes, okay. So I'm shaking, dude. I said, I'm going to get killed here. I go in the shower. I said, bring it, bro. Come on. Talk a lot of smack. Bring it. I'm here. Beat the crap out of me. Guy never left the cell. Never. So that was, without me knowing, the initiation of, I can play people.
Yeah.
To do what I want, the UC aspect, and giving yourself some respect.
And you learn the game.
Yeah.
Exactly. But it was two different populations there that taught me different things. So,
and it's funny how all of our beginnings, everything we did helped. When we became, at the peak of our professions. How your beginnings help you, because ultimately we all ended up dealing with the worst of the worst. And there is a reason why we have Victor Avila and Dino Ortiz on, because we're going to bring that together because they both ended up churning the same soil down there in Mexico much later in their careers. So, Victor, let's get back to you as far as in the meat of your career and how it brought you to be down there in New Mexico before the incident.
Yeah, it started with narcotics, right at the border. I was enjoying those investigations, having a great time, and great old federal government style on a Friday at 3. I don't know what I was doing at the office because no one else was there. to my cubicle, and there's this memo saying effective Monday you're being transferred to the human smuggling and human trafficking group. And I was upset, man. I was pissed. I went to my supervisor's office and said, "What's going on, man? I'm doing everything here. I'm working hard. And you know how it is. Well, because of that, you're getting transferred, Victor, to
we need you to go fix this.
Right, and I didn't understand human smuggling and human trafficking. I didn't know much about it. You know, that's because of that whole merger. The emphasis on immigration wasn't a lot still there, even though human trafficking is not an immigration violation. I can explain that. But so I reluctantly go. I show up. It's a different building, different atmosphere, different supervisor, and I hated it. And I ended up being a subject matter expert in human trafficking. I got trained. And that's what I did. That was like my expertise. But in the course of those investigations, they bring a big case, a human smuggling case to me, and they say, "Listen, this involves a corrupt border patrol agent or agents. We don't know how many. Are you willing to do it?" Because our OIG, DHS OIG, it was 2 agents in El Paso. They didn't have the manpower to work this investigation. I said, "I'll do it." And that's the case. You know, everybody probably has a case in their career that makes their career. That was mine. Worked about a year nonstop of it, did all the good stuff that a special agent gets to do, and the cameras and the undercover work and the recordings and all that good stuff. And so we took these people down, and it was a great successful case. So I got a little leverage at the office and say, okay, well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to do financial investigations. That's what I want to do. So I got trained to do, you know, the money laundering, the bulk cash smuggling, and started doing that. And then I started doing that. In the middle of that, this position opens up at the U.S. consulate in Juarez, right across the Ciudad Juarez, right across we had 2 agents assigned there on the other side, and it was a TDY, and I put in for it. And I remember getting this is 2008, I get selected for the TDY, and I initially I drive my G-Ride to the port of entry, get picked up really early in an armored vehicle, and then we'll go work over there. Initially, DEA and ICE were at a private building where like architects, it was just the U.S. consulate building, the brand new building that's there now, was about to be finished in the construction, but they were still in a private building, which is very non-secure whatsoever. But and that building, the consulate couldn't come at a better time, because one of those days, this is in 2008, and I'll take you back. This is when Ciudad Juarez was the most dangerous city in the world. They were killing about 350 people a month there.
Jesus. Well, and it's important to note just on that, you know, you're talking about tactics and security, which in the incident we're going to talk about later, that's one of the major issues in it. Like, it is where really was the focus on security. If you have American government agencies in an unsecure location in Juarez, Mexico, it makes you wonder.
And you know what? I grew up there. I used to go party over there. I knew Juarez. It was a very, very surreal feeling to me, because I felt like at home. You know, like this is, you know, we show up to work in the morning, and they killed 6 people at the restaurant that we had lunch the day before. What? You know, it's kind of hard to wrap that around your head. Like, the violence was just all around us. The city was, by 7 p.m., it was a ghost town. And so you can imagine the amount of work, mass grave sites, bodies hanging from bridges, you name it. This is at the peak of that violence. And I always say this, I always thought Mexico cannot get any worse than it is right then. I was very wrong. It's a lot worse now, but it's a shame that it is. But so we moved from that building and moved into the U.S. consulate. But let me tell you what happened right before then. We show up, and there's the police and the Mexican police. This is in Juarez. What's going on in front of the building? There was a body that was dumped by the cartel in front of the building with a sign for DEA, with a message for DEA saying we know you're here. And so that building couldn't have come at a better time to feel at least a little bit more secure and working in there. But so I'm in there doing my TDY. The only person that knows that I'm doing this is my wife. You know, it's all over the news. The violence, it's a daily occurrence, and so nobody else knows but my work and my wife. And so during those investigations, there's an opportunity to go on an arms trafficking case to Mexico City. I've never been. I'm so curious to go. I tell the assistant attaché, hey, please, I'll be the note taker. You know, let me tag along. And then he comes back and says, do you want to go handle it yourself? Because he didn't want to go. And I said, absolutely, I'll take it. And so I took the people, went to Mexico City, handled the meeting, and had a couple of good friends that were already stationed there in DEA. They drove me around, fell in love with the city. I loved it. I said, man, I could definitely do this. And you know, in your career, sometimes the stars align. There was an opening up. The attaché, ICE attaché, said, can you stay in Mexico City for the rest of the TDY instead of going down in to Juarez? And I said, yeah. And so they did something, switched me over, spend the rest of my TDY over there. And before that TDY was over, and I'll share this story. A lot of people don't know the story, but I helped escort. They extended my TDY to help escort an agent that had finished his tour and escort him on Highway 57, which that's the same highway we were attacked. I was very familiar with that highway from the very beginning. That was the first time I drove it. And we escorted, you know, several, 3 armored vehicles, him and his family in the middle, from Mexico City all the way to Texas, which is about an 11, 12-hour drive. And during that drive, in the middle of the drive, we all pull over, and one of the agents from another car comes up to me behind him and says, hey, Victor, we got the attaché on the phone. And I answer the phone, yes, sir. And he says, hey, you still interested in coming to Mexico City? I said, absolutely. He says, is your wife is okay with coming? I said, yes, you know, she's on board. She said, well, congratulations, and offer me a position. So it was an awesome time for me, very excited. And, you know, fast forward after you go through the whole State Department training, and you're absolutely right. Mexico is dangerous, and it's a critical 4 country, just like Iraq, just like Afghanistan. When I was going through the State Department training, they call it SOS training. Everybody is going to Baghdad and you know, all these different parts around the world. They're calling out the levels of criticalness, and you know, people are going to Singapore, it's a 1. There are no zeros because they don't do zeros, but 1 meaning there's no incidents in that country. You're going to Canada, it's a 1, and then they start Baghdad 4, Afghanistan 4, Iraq 4, Mexico 4. You know, it's just right there. That's how it is. That's how it's categorized. And get there with a family and hit the ground running. It's the most I've worked in my life ever, and I loved it. It's not.
I bet you learned a little bit in a hurry.
Boy, from the get-go. In a couple of weeks, I was down south in the jungle doing southern assessments of the border in Guatemala with customs and the Navy. I mean, you name it, I was doing it. Human trafficking investigations. I was rescuing kids and women, and God, it was great work. You know, flying in private jets. It was incredible experience. I loved it. I didn't neglect my family. That's the downside of it. I think at months, sometimes I would be in Mexico in my apartment 1 or 2 or 3 days out of the month. Wow. And so that part I'm not very proud of, but you know what? I love the work, man. It's just this rush. I think you guys understand that I love the whole aspect. Initially, I thought the diplomat work. Oh, I'm going to be a diplomat. I'm going to go to fine wine and dine. And boy, it was not like that in Mexico. Maybe just a little bit, but it was on the ground, teaching the government of Mexico, the justice system, how we do it. They needed training from how to do a search warrant, you name it, A through Z. And so we did a lot of training and investigations in the middle of all that.
No, and Victor, you touched on a couple things there. And one of the things is, Lou having the undercover career that he had, and Dino and those guys all working. It's this thing, your life becomes your mission. Whatever it is, be it a storefront operation, for you, probably firearms trafficking, that kind of stuff. When you get wrapped into those cases, you kind of take it personal. You lose your professional grip a little bit in that this becomes so important that it's what you're going to do. You're going to succeed at this mission no matter what. And I think it's a common law enforcement trait where families get neglected because the mission becomes inadvertently becomes so much more important.
Yeah.
And that's something that you see. And I don't really think it matters, but I think guys, and I don't want to put myself anywhere near your category, but guys like us, you know, if it's a narcotics investigation, it's a gang investigation, you put your heart and soul into it. And I think that's something that the public doesn't really realize. They don't realize it, you know, it's not for glory, it's not anything like that. It's just you care so much about accomplishing that mission that you immerse yourself into it.
Yeah, even my wife, you know, I got to a point where even when I was home, I wasn't home.
Yes.
My body was there, but I wasn't there. You know, and people will attest to this. We're on the phone, emails, reports, the BlackBerry back then. It didn't stop. Hundreds and hundreds of emails per day. We're helping our offices within the states. You remember the tax schemes from DC.
Dude, let me interrupt you, Victor. Let me interrupt you because you just brought up a heck of a point. My wife went down with me, and in fact, my wife had only been in country for 2 months when your incident happened, and I'll expand on what happened then. But I remember getting home one evening, and the BlackBerry.
Yeah.
And our BlackBerries, we had a pinger system. Basically, it was a distress. You put a code in, and that was your what was the blue box or whatever the embassy had? Remember yeah, you know. So I put my BlackBerry down, and I immediately pick it up. And at this point, I'm the acting attaché, so I'm getting everything. And I put it down. She goes, "Can you not put that down for 5 minutes?" And I go, "Okay, honey, okay." And I put it down, and I lasted, I think, a good minute 45. And I pick it up, and she says, "I told you," I said, "let me explain something to you. If there's an alert on my phone that one of my guys has sent out a distress signal, if I don't get on that within the first 5 minutes, and I can, the guy was, oh God, he worked with the RSO, not Chappelle, not the comedian. He was actually former special forces, and he was a personal security expert. If I don't get with that guy within 20 minutes, that's their window to get our guy back. If you go past 20 minutes, you're done. You may find body parts. And the wives have to put up with that. So when Victor said, one thing is the States, and Lou, I worked cases with you, and we would stay late, or we would, this is another level. This is, there's only 2 places in my career that I've worked as hard and as gratifying and frustrating at the same time. And that's Mexico and Puerto Rico. The 2 levels. And what Victor said, you basically give your life. You might be in the embassy, and yeah, you're in Mexico City in the high life. You don't get to enjoy that high life that much, bro. I was leaving the office at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And that was because I didn't want to get in 2-hour traffic, because it would take me an hour and a half to get home.
Very true.
So traffic, it would take me an hour and a half to get home. You know how far I live from the embassy? 3.2 miles. I lived in Lomas de Chapultepec, right off Reforma, 3.2 miles. And people would say, well, why don't you just walk home? I said, well, they gave me an armored car for a reason. Why would I get out of my armored car? But anyway, I feel your pain, Victor, because that is exactly right.
And I give the credit to my wife, and I will later on even more, because at one point she had all my phones, 3 phones, in the bathroom. She locked the door and said, "You're not going to get them. You're not going to get phones."
Hey, God bless her.
It was that bad. But kind of pushing forward, coming to that 2010, 2011 New Year. I was known in my office in ICE as the traveling guy, right? Not because I wanted to. The investigations take you there. I just travel a lot, and all around Mexico, Central America, United States. And I told my wife, okay, 2011, I'm going to do everything that I can in my power to limit the travel, however it is that I can. But it almost seemed that I said completely the opposite, because starting 2011, I'm in Panama, Guatemala, Denver, Arizona, like almost on purpose. And it wasn't just because that's the way the investigations worked, right? So it became really, really difficult to deal with the family that way. But you fast forward there to the February, we're coming up to February now, 2011, and everybody knows February 15th was when the attack happened. I was in Denver debriefing a source and working on a special interest alien case. A special interest alien is what we call SIAs. They come from special interest countries, and this guy, the smuggler, was smuggling, Afghans and Somalis and other people through Mexico. That's terrorism. A lot of people don't kind of forget about that. And so that's a big issue that we're working. I had a big case going. I'm debriefing the guy. Meet him and have to go down to Tucson. And I'm in Tucson on a Thursday. This is the Thursday before the shooting. The shooting happened on a Tuesday. And I am an expert traveler at this point. And you know what I'm talking about. I know how to change flights and hotels and all that. And so I do that. I'm in Tucson. I'm 4 hours from El Paso. And I do my change, my flight, and I rent my personal car and I drive to El Paso. I surprise my family, my parents. Now that I look back, it was a very kind of almost like a saying goodbye trip, because I saw family and friends that I had not seen in a long time and was there from Thursday to Sunday. The guys from Juarez took me to the airport. I get back to Mexico City Sunday night, get into my apartment in Mexico City at 1:30 in the morning, Monday morning. Wake up, it's Valentine's Day, February 14th, and I go to the office. And my whole plan that week was to stay in the office. And you guys know everything that we do, we gotta write. We gotta write reports, and we have administrative duties to do. And that has so many duties to do at the office that was my whole goal that whole week. But around noon, right next to my cubicle, my friend, gives me the heads up and says, "Hey, they're gonna send you to Monterey." And I don't know if we could cuss here, but I'm like, what the?
Oh, cuss away,
by all means.
What the fuck are you talking about, man? I was very upset. I go, shit, am I the only guy in this office? I just got here, man. I've been out 7 days. And so we go to lunch, Mexico City lunch, 2:00, come back, and sure enough, my supervisor calls me in and says, Victor, you're gonna take the TD wire. Referred to Jaime Zapata as a TD wire. I hadn't even met Jaime. He had been in the country that week before where I'd been out. He had come from the Laredo office. We had been working a big arms trafficking case, and we had Laredo agents come in on a TDY basis on a 30 to 60, 90-day tours, because we were so understaffed that we just needed their agents to basically work their case in country. And that's what they were doing. So Jaime had just come in to relieve another of the agents, had been there a little over a week. And I get the order and I said, what's going on? I'm not debriefed. I have no idea what's going on. They had been working on this for weeks. And he says, get with the assistant attaché out of Monterey, our ICE assistant attaché out of the consulate in Monterey. We get on the phone, and he tells us, listen, there's a lot of firefights going on this highway. This is not safe. Let's send this through a diplomatic pouch, which is, our mail and all that comes through a secure truck. Let's fly it. There's other options to get this equipment that they wanted. Boxes of, tracking devices and electronic devices that they were going to use for a big money laundering case. And it's important to mention that, because this case was probably one of the biggest money laundering cases that I think that ICE had seen since the merger and before the U.S. Customs Service. It had originated in Colombia, and Colombia was running the show. And then we got brought in when we seized $40 million in cash in a container in Veracruz. And so our supervisors got all excited about this case and all that, but I wasn't really involved, even though everybody helped each other in the office with investigations. I wasn't very familiar with what was going on in that case. I wasn't debriefed at all.
Hey, Victor, was it a cartel involved case? Was there a certain cartel involved?
Oh yeah, well yeah. That's all cartel involved, and it's always in Mexico. That was one of the first things to identify is which cartel is that we're targeting here. Is it the Sinaloa cartel? Is it the Gulf cartel? The Zeta cartel? And so, yes, it's all cartel related. And I challenged the assignment. I asked my supervisor, listen, go to the deputy attaché and tell him what the assistant attaché in Monterey is saying. So he does. This is a very small office. He goes, knocks on the door. The deputy attaché comes out. He's in front of me there, and my supervisor tells him, the old chain of command, and he tells him, listen, we're listening, we're hearing all this stuff, and this intelligence that's going on down there. And the deputy attaché says, I'm not aware of any security issues in Mexico.
Whoa.
Those are his words, and I'll continue to quote that forever.
Hey, well,
I'm not aware of any security issues in Mexico. I don't know what country he thought he was working in. And I need that equipment by close of business day tomorrow.
Well, and here, Victor, not to cut you off, but I want to make sure that this point gets made. Okay, so there's no security in Mexico, even though we've already covered the fact that it has the same security ranking as Baghdad and probably Kabul and these things. Now, to exacerbate that a bit, Highway 57, all right, I guess in military terms, as far as a drug cartel goes, that's an MSR. It's a main supply route, and it's well known. It's a narco-terrorist artery that runs north and south in one of the most dangerous countries in the world. So you have an attaché from ICE saying he's not aware of a security issue.
Let me interject here a minute, talking about security and I think I know who he's talking about, but for him to say there's no security, I had already worked 4 car buys. I'm talking vehicle-borne IEDs in Mexico. One in Juarez, one in two in Ciudad Victoria, and one in Guadalajara. So we're not talking
that sounds like a security issue.
Listen, one of these, not to interject, but to talk about security, and if he's not aware, then he wasn't paying attention in country team meetings, or the small or big law enforcement team meetings. We went to one in Ciudad Victoria that we were escorted by a company of infantry from the Mexico military to do the post-blast. I thought I had 4, 5, 6 hours. I knew how to do it quicker. In the States, you do it a little slower. I said, now 4 hours, I can do it. I was on the scene for 30 minutes. And the guy says, how long do you got to go? I said, I got another hour and a half. He goes, you got 5 minutes. I said, what do you mean 5 minutes? He says, well, the cartel knows you're here. They're the ones that put the bomb, and we don't know how to have enough people to secure you. So you got to finish picking up whatever you're going to pick up in 5 minutes, because we're leaving. If you want to stay, we're gone.
That sounds like a security issue again.
That's what I'm saying is that you had and Victor's, to give Victor's, I guess, point more emphasis, you had some, and I'm going to say it straight out, you had some stone cold idiots that didn't deserve to be there on the job because they didn't know where they were. They thought they were back in Denver, hey, we'll go out whatever, or here or there, and didn't have the experience or the wherewithal to say, holy crap, A, we're in a foreign country, B, okay, we got armored cars, but hey, Victor, did you have long guns?
No.
Neither did we. The only people that had long guns were DEA, and they were grandfathered in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And let me share the story because it's important, and it has to do with the armored vehicles. When I got there, they had these old armored vehicles. You remember those? ICE had botched this contract with the armored vehicles. They had put cement in the doors.
Cement in the doors.
Remember that? Anyway, so they finally got rid of those, and these brand new Suburbans, right? We go pick them up in Texas. This is what we did to go pick up 5 armored Suburbans. We notified everyone, the good people, the bad people, everyone that we said, we're gonna fly in to Texas. We have to drive them back to Mexico City. We're gonna drive them back, and we're not there to do any kind of enforcement. We're there. We're just going to drive. We had, in Tamaulipas, we were coming, and we had, 50 police officers escort us through the state of Tamaulipas to get out. It was, yes, the sight of the 5 Suburbans together, it was a sight to see because these Suburbans are armored. They look different. They look armored. And let me tell you, armored vehicles in Mexico and Dino Ortiz, they're very common. Armored vehicles are normal over there. It's not a big deal. Maybe in the States, you'll be like, oh, you'll see an armored vehicle in the presidential motorcade or something like that. But in Mexico, businessmen own armored vehicles. It's a normal thing.
That with two Chargers, one in front and one behind following them, that are not armored.
That's absolutely correct. And so we had to notify all these people, guess what? Checkpoints that we had to go through. Illegal, legal checkpoints, military checkpoints, police checkpoints, cartel checkpoints. We did that and we get out of there and we're successful. We get to Mexico City. It was all over the news. And the news had reported that all our 5 Suburbans were, these drug cartel Suburbans. That's what they reported. But it just goes to tell you what they don't know anything. But anyway, that I want to say that because that was what we did and prepared for that event. When I got that assignment, there was no debrief, there was no operational plan. There was like, you get Jaime and you go get that equipment. There was no backup. There was not 2-3 cars. There was no get with the Mexican government for an escort. There was none of that. It's just go do it, get with the guys from Monterrey and go pick it up. And even after the challenge, I'll pick it up after he said that the deputy attaché told us that about the no incident in Mexico. He turns around and goes into his office and shuts the door. Your order, right? And so I get on the phone with the assistant attaché in Monterrey, and I say, listen, where do we meet? San Luis Potosí, being the state and the city of the same name, kind of the halfway point. I told them, you come to San Luis Potosí. They're like, we're not going there. That's like the hottest territory, right? And I'm like, okay. We ended up passing San Luis Potosí, so we drove a little bit more. So I get introduced to Jaime Zapata at that time. It's 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock that Valentine's Day. All plans with the wife are gone, right? They're gone for Valentine's Day. Forget it. It's over. I meet Jaime. We get phones. I had a box full of phones, throwdown phones. But he had his phone. We exchanged the codes. Remember the radios? That was our lifeline. Yep. The radios. We get the codes, and I tell Jaime, be in my apartment because we live north of the city. There's no way for me to come down here and pick you up with the traffic. You go over there. Another agent drove him to my apartment, 6:30 in the morning, and we drive out Tuesday morning, February 15th, which he did.
To be continued next week on End of Watch with Bootsy and Sal.
Embassy, switch my office.
This is Victor Avila from ICE. We are shot. We are on the highway of Querétaro, Mexico. We've been shot and attacked on the highway. I am an ICE special agent.
What is your name, you said, sir?
Victor Avila. Please call Jerry Miles.
Okay. Try to remain online, please.
Wednesday on End of Watch with Bootsy and Sal.
And before you knew it, 2 guys came to my window. One of them introduced an AK-47 right by my face and a handgun. And so I immediately braced myself back against the post of the Suburban and I raised the window. And then without notice, they just opened fire. Then Jaime yells out, I'm hit, I'm shot.
Available on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and more.